Starfield was a massive disappointment, a game that launched with many fundamental problems and failed to recreate the magic of the Elder Scrolls and Fallout series, so much so that I quickly abandoned Starfield and went back to playing Skyrim and Fallout 4, which I think are both far better games, and judging by the number of negative reviews on Steam, many gamers would agree with that assessment. Shattered Space, a DLC expansion for Starfield, was recently released and it hasn't exactly been met with a positive reception. Content that fails to live up to previous expectations set by other releases such as Fallout 4's Far Harbor and Cyberpunk's Phantom Liberty, with many describing it as boring, lacking content and not worth the price tag. And frankly, even if the expansion itself was good, it's somewhat overshadowed by the failure of the main game to live up to previous titles. Without going too much into story spoilers, for those who haven't played this, the DLC is based around House Va'ruun, which is mentioned during the core game's main quest line, with the house also having an embassy in the city of New Atlantis, as well as the companion character of Andrea also originating from House Va'ruun, though there's no actual interaction with the house and we don't learn much about them. The DLC is activated when you visit the orbit of most planets, though from what I understand, this excludes any planet that has a police presence that scans your ship for contraband, which is an event which will stop the DLC from activating at that location, so it can't be any of the main inhabited planets. When the DLC does activate, you are presented with this large space station that has a repeating message telling people to stay away. Of course you don't stay away, instead you board the station and are confronted with this. After fighting your way through the station, you learn that the station has a grav drive which activates and jumps the station to the orbit of Dazra, the home world of House Va'ruun, with the rest of the DLC taking place entirely on the planet. Landing on the planet, we are introduced to House Va'ruun, which is essentially one giant religious cult run by various different houses, with the society built around the worship of a mythical space serpent, with everyone being born into the cult and forced to serve that ideology and its goals, whether they want to or not. We learn that there's been a catastrophe that has wiped out half of the city, centered around this imposing citadel, which not only killed a lot of people, but is also the cause of these phantoms that attacked you on the space station. You have to unite the various governing houses, which all have their own ambitions and goals, and investigate why this catastrophe occurred in the first place. This review will be mostly negative because that's the reality surrounding this DLC, but I'll start with the positives. The DLC does get off to a good start as you explore this somewhat spooky and abandoned space station. There's an air of mystery and suspense, with the mission making good use of the station's gravity bin off, with dead bodies and other items floating around, along with this strange glowing blue stuff. This mission introduces us to these spectral soldiers that can appear out of nowhere and teleport, adding a new dimension to the combat. The combat is the same as in the Starfield core game, which has always been one of the game's few good features, with a few new weapons and armor sets. The planet of Dazra is one of the expansion's better aspects. It certainly looks like an exotic alien world, with this nice looking Aurora Borealis style atmospheric effect. But one of the fundamental problems of Starfield, as I talked about in my previous video about how to improve the game, is the boring setting. There's plenty of worlds and moons to explore, but they're almost all procedurally generated, barren, lifeless rocks, with some pirate bases and abandoned buildings scattered around. Setting the game in one single hand, crafted location goes some way to fixing that issue, as you no longer move from star system to star system, only to find very little of interest, which wastes the player's time and is very boring. The map isn't huge, and some environmental diversity wouldn't hurt, but I do give the game points for making a nice area to explore. This was the first time I had used Starfield's Land Rover, which was added with a recent update before this DLC came out, a feature which frankly should have been present in the game since it was first released. The main storyline is serviceable at best, which isn't really a compliment, it's simply average. You have to work to unite the various houses, all of which has their own issues and political goals, getting them to work together to deal with the catastrophe that destroyed half of the city. It's a story that at the base level works well. There's a problem and you solve it, but you need to do more than simply getting the core concept right to actually have a decent story. The story is bland and uninteresting, with a concept that is fine in theory, mystery, political intrigue, and plenty of combat. However, the whole thing just feels boring and seemed to drag on, despite being only around 5 hours in length. There's way too much dialogue spewed at you in this expansion. People seem to keep on talking and talking, to the point where I was quickly skimming through the dialogue and skipping through it as fast as possible. If this article is to be believed, there's over 250,000 lines of dialogue, which really should have been trimmed down to what was actually necessary to get the information across. The core story is short, not to mention uninteresting, a story filled with bland characters. The side quests don't take long to wrap up, and they also fail to impress me. There's also a lack of expected content, stuff that you really expect to have been included. There's no new companion characters, no ship modifications, no new skill tree or abilities, along with very few weapons and armor sets. Dawnguard, the Skyrim DLC, is an example of how to do it right. That expansion not only has an interesting story, but it also gave us Serana, who is a great character, along with a skill tree for the werewolf and vampire forms that the player can take. The city is small and uninteresting, with very little to explore. There is an in-game justification for a lot of the city being missing, as it was destroyed in the Cataclysm, though that feels like an easy and lazy justification for not making a decent-sized area to explore. I've heard it said that this game is cut content, that it was originally part of the core game, that was cut out and sold separately to maximise profit. I don't know if there's any truth behind that statement, or if it's just criticism levelled against the game because it's bad. All of these problems make the price tag of this expansion very unappealing, half of the price of the full game, with only a fraction of the content, with many believing it to be far too high for what you are getting. My advice, if you haven't already bought this game, is not to bother playing it. If you want an open world adventure, the Elder Scrolls and Fallout series are far better games. If you got this far, I want to thank you very much for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you like this review, please consider liking and subscribing. I hope to see you in my next video. Bye for now.